Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. Dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised.
This all happened when I was a teenager. Well, not even a teenager yet, really. I was around 12, maybe 13. I'm not exactly sure, but it was somewhere in that range. I grew up in the city. I lived in Lakewood until I was about 11. And then my parents decided that staying there just wasn't sustainable anymore with what they were making. It had gotten too expensive, too demanding. And so we moved to where my grandparents were originally from, West Virginia. Right up against the Appalachian Mountains, deep forest, real isolation. I hadn't really spent time in the mountains before that. Honestly, I barely even visited my grandparents growing up. And when I did, we almost never left the house. So going from a city environment to something that rural, that quiet, that cut off, it hit me hard. There wasn't the same group of kids I knew. My parents were more stressed than usual because of money, and I could feel it, even if they didn't say it out loud. It was one of those changes that just lands on you all at once, and you're expected to adapt without anyone really explaining what's going on. They didn't have much emotional bandwidth to walk me through it. I didn't feel close to my grandparents, didn't even really see them as part of my life. I didn't know the forest, didn't understand the risks, didn't know what to be careful about. So, yeah, it was rough. And it all happened right at that stage of life where everything inside you starts shifting. Hormones, emotions, identity, stuff you don't fully understand yet and don't really know how to talk about, even if you wanted to. All of that combined pushed me toward a group of kids from the area. The kind that were always looking for trouble. I think, looking back, it was my way of getting attention. Any kind of reaction from my parents, really. And what I'm about to tell you happened one night because of that. There was this one guy in the group, Caleb. He was probably the most reckless out of all of us. The kind of kid who always had to take things one step further, just to prove something. Once I started hanging around them, I realized there were all these stories people told about the forest, about the mountains. I didn't really believe most of it, but I was still a kid, and some of it got under my skin more than I'd like to admit. One of the ways we proved we weren't kids anymore, that we were tough, that we were real men, or whatever we thought that meant, was by pushing deeper into the mountains. Near where I still live today, there's this massive network of caves. Some natural, some clearly man-made. Just a lot of them, scattered through the area. And caves were always considered the worst. It's easy to get lost in them, really easy. You take one wrong turn and suddenly you can't find your way back out. On top of that, a lot of animals use them for shelter. And then there were the stories, things people swore lived in there. I never saw proof of that, but the stories were always there. And then there was the more realistic side of it. People who didn't exactly live by the rules, people on the margins, use those caves too. Not always for anything good. When I was younger, there were even groups using them to cook drugs, hiding out where no one would stumble across them by accident. So, yeah, not exactly the kind of place you go for fun. But Caleb started daring people to go with him, and I was the only one in the group who still had something to prove. I was the new kid, the easy target. They were always messing with me, and I felt it. Felt like I had to earn my place somehow. So I didn't hesitate. I said I wasn't scared, said I'd go. That same night, I waited until my parents went to sleep. Around 11:30, once the house was completely quiet, once I was sure my dad had taken his sleeping pills and my mom was out, I opened my bedroom window and slipped out as quietly as I could. I headed to where Caleb and I had agreed to meet. That alone should have been enough to make me turn back. The forest was pitch black, not just dark, dense. My flashlight barely cut through it. The beam felt weak, swallowed up almost immediately. And I could feel it building inside me. That kind of fear that doesn't come from a clear thought, just this steady pressure in your chest. Still, I kept going. I told myself I had to do this, that this was what it took to finally fit in. I started walking faster, trying to distract myself by making up little stories in my head, anything to avoid focusing on what was around me. When I finally saw Caleb in the distance, I felt this wave of relief. I didn't even like the guy much. Not then, not now. He still lives around here, and we still see each other sometimes, but there's always been something strange between us. I think whatever happened that night stripped away that whole tough kid image we both had, and neither of us really forgot that. But at that moment, seeing him standing there, I was just glad I wasn't alone anymore. From there, we started heading toward the cave. I had no idea where we were going. I just followed him. He kept saying he'd been there plenty of times, that I didn't need to worry, that everything would be fine. But then he'd switch it up, casually mention that he'd run into people inside before, which completely contradicted what he'd just said. Obviously, that didn't help. The last thing I wanted was to run into anyone down there. We kept walking until we reached the entrance, and I almost turned back right there. I was really scared. It was too dark, too quiet, and I had no idea where I was anymore. I wanted out, but that was the problem. I didn't know how to get back. I needed Caleb for that. He was the only one who knew the way. I asked him if he was sure we should go in. He just looked at me and asked if I was already getting scared, said it in this mocking tone that hit me right in the gut. And just like that, I felt it again, that need to prove something. I couldn't back out now, not in front of him. So I said, yeah, we could go in. We'd been inside the cave for maybe a minute when I started noticing something was different. Any light from outside, the moon, anything, was gone completely. That part made sense. What didn't make sense was the flashlight. It should have felt stronger in there. The darker the space, the more a light stands out, right? But it didn't. It was like the darkness had weight to it, like it absorbed the beam instead of letting it spread. I could barely see a few feet ahead of me. The walls were there, sure, wet, uneven rock, but if I pointed the light forward, all I saw was this narrow stretch of damp ground, and then nothing, just a tunnel that disappeared into black. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't see beyond it. At that point, I had no idea how long we'd been inside the cave. I think in a way, I was so scared, like truly terrified, that I lost any sense of time, of distance, of what was actually happening around me. It all felt unreal. I'd never felt that kind of fear before, not even close. I remember grabbing Caleb and telling him, "I want to go back. I want out of here now." And when I looked at him, I could see it on his face. He was just as scared as I was. I don't think he had ever actually been inside that cave before, at least not like that, not at night. Because the atmosphere in there was overwhelming. Heavy, like it was pressing down on you, making it harder to breathe, harder to think. Then, off to our right, there was a split in the cave. A narrow passage branching off, and we heard something. Without even thinking, both of us turned off our flashlights at the exact same time. It was almost instinctive. I can't even explain why we did that. Maybe a normal reaction would have been to point the light toward the sound, but somehow we both just knew there was something, or someone, there. And the last thing we wanted was to be seen. But what happened next was worse. I don't know if it was a person, but it had to be, right? It had to be. Still, the voice didn't sound right. It was rough, strained, like it was scraping its way out of someone's throat. Not natural, not normal. And yet, we understood it perfectly. It said, "Turning off the flashlight won't help. I see you better in the dark." We both just lost it, started screaming. No hesitation, no thinking, just pure panic. And honestly, I don't even know how to describe what came after. I feel like in any other situation, I might have just frozen or blacked out from fear. But the adrenaline hit so hard, and Caleb was yelling as much as I was, that we kind of fed off each other's panic and just ran. No plan and no clear direction, just ran until we saw the cave entrance again. And even after we got out, we didn't stop. We kept going, faster than I thought I was even capable of. Not looking back, not slowing down, just putting as much distance as possible between us and that place. We didn't stop until we were about halfway back, completely out of breath. I asked him if he was okay, what the hell that even was. He said he didn't know. Said maybe it was someone living in the caves, someone sleeping in there. But I could tell, he had no idea. We didn't have an explanation. We just knew what we heard, and that was enough. After we caught our breath, we kept moving. Faster this time, but more controlled. We didn't stop again until we reached my house, and we didn't even hesitate. We went straight to my window, climbed inside, and stayed in my room the rest of the night. We just sat there, talking in low voices, going over it again and again, trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense. The weirdest part is, Caleb was exactly the kind of person who would have told everyone. He would have turned it into a story, something to brag about, proof that we went through something intense and made it out. But that night, he was different. He was just as shaken as I was, and without really saying it outright, we both understood. We weren't going to talk about it, not to anyone. And we didn't. To this day, we've never brought it up again. I've talked about this with a few people over the years, and I'm pretty sure Caleb has too, but never anyone from back then. Never anyone from that circle. And never anyone who might actually believe that what we heard that night was anything more than just some drifter using the caves as a place to stay. Because that's the easy explanation, right? Someone living down there. Someone who didn't want to be found. But the truth is, the way it spoke didn't sound human. Not fully. Not the way a person's voice is supposed to carry, even in a place like that. And still, what else could it have been? There's no other explanation. Maybe if that happened to me now, as an adult, I'd react differently. Maybe I wouldn't panic the same way. Maybe I'd shine the flashlight straight at whoever, or whatever that was. Or maybe I wouldn't. I honestly don't know. All I know is that back then, it was the most terrifying moment of my life. And in some way, it stuck with me. Ever since that night, I've never been fully comfortable in the dark. I wouldn't say I'm outright afraid of it, but I can't do complete darkness anymore. I always need at least a little bit of light, just enough to make out shapes, outlines, something. I've always been someone who loves exploring caves. I know that, for most people, it probably sounds like a strange hobby, maybe even a little unsettling, and I get that. But I've never really had a genuine fear of tight spaces, or darkness, or any of the things people usually associate with caves. So for me, exploring them isn't stressful. It's something that actually brings me a real sense of excitement, even purpose. Over the years, I've met more and more people who feel the same way, people who are passionate about it, who genuinely love what they do. And because of that, I've been doing it more and more often. The story I'm about to tell you actually started with one of those people. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Appalachian Mountains almost feel like they exist in layers. There's the surface level, which is already unsettling on its own. You've probably heard that it's one of the regions in the US with a high number of disappearances and events that are, frankly, hard to explain. But beneath that, there's an entire underground system of caves. It's almost like a second mountain range, hidden below the first. These caves connect to each other through an enormous network of passages. So many, in fact, that fully mapping or exploring them is basically impossible. Most of the time, you don't even find the same cave twice. There's always something new, something different. I don't know how familiar you are with these cave systems, but just to give you some grounding, what runs beneath the Appalachian Mountains isn't just a scattering of isolated caverns. It's part of an immense karst landscape carved over hundreds of millions of years, where slightly acidic groundwater dissolved layers of limestone and left behind a labyrinth of tunnels, shafts, and hidden chambers that, in some regions, stretch for miles without interruption. Places like Mammoth Cave, the longest cave system ever mapped, are only the visible fraction of something much larger and far less understood. Because for every documented passage, there are countless others that collapse, flood, or simply vanish into tight, unmapped voids. Historically, these caves have served as shelter, burial sites, and even hideouts, which means there's a long record of human presence layered over the natural formation. But just as many accounts of people who entered and never came back out. Local folklore doesn't always agree on what's down there. Some stories talk about sounds that travel through stone in ways that don't make sense. Others describe figures glimpsed at the edge of lantern light, distorted by darkness, yet moving with intent. None of that has ever been substantiated in a scientific sense, of course. But what is documented, and far more unsettling, is how easily these environments can disorient even experienced explorers. The absence of natural light, the way sound bends and echoes, the constant humidity, the subtle depletion of oxygen in certain pockets. Down there, your senses don't just fail you, they begin to reinterpret reality. And that's often where the line between what's explainable and what isn't starts to blur. So about 3 years ago, I met a guy through one of these cave exploration groups. Not only did he share this interest, but for him, it was more than just a hobby. It eventually became his work. He studies cave-dwelling organisms, creatures that have adapted over time to survive in environments where darkness is absolute. Essentially, he's a biologist. Back when we first met, though, he hadn't fully gone down that path yet. Over those 3 years, we became pretty close. We talked often, and we even explored a few caves together. At some point, he told me he had bought a cabin in these mountains, in North Carolina, in an area with an incredibly dense concentration of caves. From what he had discovered so far, many of them were interconnected underground. He had been gradually exploring them, documenting what he found, signs that suggested something unusual might be present. Not human, but not entirely unlike humans either. Sometimes it was footprints, other times marks that didn't seem to have been made by animals. Almost like drawings, but hard to make sense of. Occasionally, he'd find animal remains near cave entrances, bones that suggested the animals had been killed and eaten inside the caves, even though they were species that lived outside, which implied something was bringing them in. He also became convinced that whatever was down there had some level of intelligence. He had tried setting up trail cameras at the cave entrances, hoping to capture something. But either the cameras would go missing and later turn up destroyed, or they would record nothing at all. And yet, whenever he went inside, there were clear signs of activity. As he kept exploring, he confirmed that there were multiple entry points, more than anyone had initially thought. But what really unsettled him happened about 9 months ago. He had tried bringing his dog with him to the cabin. He lives with his wife and 2 kids, but spends most of his time alone up there, and he thought the company might help. The dog was used to the outdoors, used to the mountains, to wildlife, so there was no reason to expect a problem. But the moment they got there, something was seriously wrong. The dog became extremely agitated, growling, barking constantly, especially at night. And then, at times, it would start whining in a way that sounded like it was in pain, even though nothing was physically happening to it. He even took the dog to the vet just to make sure everything was fine. But all it took was getting away from that cabin and those caves for the dog to go back to normal. After 2 days, he realized the dog was under too much stress and took it back home. After that, he started feeling uneasy. He couldn't explain it exactly, but he felt like there were more and more signs that whatever was in those caves was becoming aware of him, of his presence, and maybe even growing tired of it. He started to feel unsafe staying in that cabin alone, to the point where he had built multiple escape routes and safety measures into the structure itself. The place was practically designed like a maze, difficult for anyone to navigate from the outside, but carefully planned so he could get out quickly if something ever happened. Eventually, he decided to put together a group, people who could help him explore the caves in numbers. The idea was that we'd all feel safer that way. Honestly, I would have done it for free. This is something I genuinely love, and I wanted to be part of what he was doing. But he had money. Apparently, he had won some kind of award years back that set him up financially, and he insisted on funding the whole thing himself. The pay wasn't huge, but it was enough to bring people in. We ended up forming a solid group, 6 people at first, then 8. We made some basic modifications to the cabin ourselves, nothing fancy, just enough to expand the sleeping areas so all 8 of us could stay there comfortably. Then we got to work. And that's where the real horror begins. Or rather, it had begun a long time ago. Probably millions of years back when these caves first formed. But this is the point where it becomes personal. Something I experienced, and something I wish I never had. This isn't an easy story, partly because it's more than just a story. This actually happened. 8 of us went into that cave, but only 6 came back out. And we still don't know what happened to the other 2. This was very recent, still under investigation. There have been posters put up in the area, and a few local news outlets have mentioned the disappearances, but I can't share their names because of the ongoing case. At least, that's what I've been told. It all started one morning. We planned to begin early. Not that it really mattered whether we started in the morning, afternoon, or at night. Once you pass a certain point inside those caves, there's no natural light at all, just total darkness. The kind where, if you turn off your flashlight and hold your hand right in front of your face, you still can't see it. There was absolutely nothing unusual about that day. We had already done this before. We had all been inside that cave. We had mapped out at least part of the entrance, and we knew there was a split further in. In fact, there were 2 branching paths not far from where we were. And we were standing in that exact area when one of us noticed what looked like a small hollow, a kind of recess that seemed to lead deeper into the cave. When we pointed our flashlights toward it, we saw something faintly reflective. It had a subtle sheen to it, something that could have easily been a mineral formation we hadn't documented yet. And since minerals can carry real economic value, we wanted to investigate further. Those 2 were the first to move forward. They stepped into that section of the cave. Not even 10 seconds later, Michael, who was 3rd in line, was just about to follow them in when everything went wrong. We heard screaming. Then something grabbed him and pulled him downward. We barely had time to react. Instinct kicked in. We grabbed him, pulled him back with everything we had, and without even thinking, all of us started running. As fast as we could, straight back toward the entrance. Thankfully, getting out wasn't difficult. We had set up a rope system, a kind of safety line, to make sure we could navigate back quickly if anything happened. On top of that, we had placed light markers along the path to give us some additional visibility beyond our flashlights. Still, we ran like our lives depended on it. Because they did. Michael was practically being carried between us. And the moment we made it out, we didn't stop. We sprinted straight to the cabin, to the safest area we could think of, and immediately called the police and the park rangers. Michael was taken to the hospital. He had visible injuries on his leg, clear marks showing that something had grabbed him, hard enough to break skin through his pants. But here's the thing, those marks didn't match any known animal. If it had been a large predator, a mountain lion, a bear, something like that, the wounds would have been far worse. Deep punctures, tearing damage. These weren't like that. The impressions were human-like, as if someone had grabbed him with incredible force. The doctors confirmed that the pressure applied to his leg had been significant, far beyond what you'd expect from a normal human grip. And yet, the shape of the marks didn't align with claws. They didn't match any known predator. The area of the cave where this happened has already been investigated, thoroughly. And the only thing we've been told is that there were no traces of the two people who went in first. Nothing. No sign they were ever there. At one point, we ourselves became part of the investigation. There were questions, understandably so. But we're still in the process of being cleared, of proving that we had nothing to do with what happened. And I genuinely don't know what to think anymore. I know none of us were responsible. We were all outside that part of the cave when it happened, trying to pull Michael back. But the fact remains, something exerted a force on him that doesn't make sense. Another thing that was later confirmed to us is that there are no minerals in that part of the cave that reflect light in any meaningful way. So then, what exactly did we see? I've wondered if it could have been eyes reflecting the beam. But the truth is, I wasn't the one who saw the shimmer. So we have no way of knowing if that's even a possibility. But even if it were, wouldn't they have noticed? Wouldn't they have seen movement or something behaving differently from a static surface? I genuinely don't know what to make of it. I've gone over what was said so many times that it feels like my mind is starting to buckle under it. It lines up too closely with what my colleague had been finding. Those signs of intelligence, those indications that something down there might be aware, might be deliberate in how it moves, how it hides. Something that lives in those caves and something that doesn't want to be seen. And I have a feeling that when the investigation is finally made public, we're going to be told that it was just an animal, that they were taken by something known, something explainable. But none of us believe that. This all happened many years ago. In truth, it began long before I was even born, though I had no idea at the time. I only started to understand any of it when I was around 18 or 20. I'll try to tell it from the beginning in a way that makes sense, even though what I'm about to share is essentially the work of my life, something my mother dedicated herself to as well, and there's no way I can fit every detail into a single telling like this. Still, I'll do my best to give you a clear sense of how everything unfolded. To start with, my childhood was shaped by a tense and complicated relationship between my parents. I was born about 47 years ago, and back then, especially in more rural areas near the Smoky Mountains, expectations were different. People valued tradition, and most believed in a very specific idea of what a family should look like. My mother never fit that mold. She wanted to work, to have interests of her own, to exist as more than just someone's wife or someone's mother. She wanted a life that didn't begin and end with my father and me. My father, on the other hand, wanted the opposite. He wanted a woman who stayed home, who cooked, who revolved entirely around him while he was the one out earning money. My mother never accepted that role, and it caused constant friction between them. To be honest, I never liked my father. He was controlling, obsessive, and completely unequipped to handle his own emotions. He couldn't regulate himself, and that had a lasting impact on me growing up. Years later, I found my mother's journals, and through them, I learned what it actually means to be yourself, and to fight for that. But at the time, all I knew was that something in our home always felt wrong. All of that tension led to what happened when I was 14. One day, my mother disappeared. She walked out of the house and never came back. My father told everyone in our town that she had run off, that she didn't care about us, that she chose her own life over her family. That became the official story. To everyone else, she was a woman who abandoned her child and left without looking back. But I never believed it. From the moment she was gone, I felt it in a way I can't fully explain. It didn't feel like she had left. It felt like I had lost her completely, like something had taken her away from me in a final, irreversible way. I spent years trying to get someone to take me seriously, going to the police, insisting something was wrong. I was 14, and they treated me like a joke. They told me my mother was unstable, that I should move on, that I should focus on building a life that didn't look anything like hers. They would tell me, very specifically, that the purpose of my life should be to control my wife better than my father had. First, to choose the right woman, and then to keep her under control. Those kinds of remarks always made my stomach turn. Those words stayed with me, and not in a good way. Still, I never let go of that feeling that something terrible had happened. When I turned 18, my father suffered a serious health crisis and became bedridden. Suddenly, I was the one taking care of him, managing the house, going through rooms and spaces I had never really been allowed to touch before. It was during that time that I found what he had missed, things that belonged to my mother, items he hadn't managed to destroy. He had burned or thrown away almost everything, but not all of it. Among those remnants, I found a map. There was a marked location deep in the forest, not too far from where we lived, but far enough to feel completely cut off from everything. I don't remember exactly when I started putting the pieces together, whether I was 18 or closer to 20, but I do remember the moment I decided I had to go there. Following that map as precisely as I could, I found it. A cabin, worn down by time, hidden among the trees as if it had been swallowed by the forest itself. The moment I saw it, something shifted in me. I can't explain it properly. It was a feeling that didn't belong to logic, something immediate and certain. A strange, quiet sense of recognition settled over me, and I knew, without any doubt, that this place had belonged to my mother. I also knew my father had no idea it existed. If he had, he would have destroyed it like he destroyed everything else. The cabin was locked, and from that point on, I became fixated on getting inside. I searched for keys, for documents, for anything that would give me access. If I had to, I was prepared to force it open or find a legal way to claim it, because I was certain that whatever was inside belonged to her, and by extension, to me. My father couldn't stop me anymore. He was confined to his bed. And for the first time, I had the freedom to act without his interference. For days, I tore through the house, searching obsessively until I found something I had never noticed before: a narrow slit hidden within a wall. Inside it, there was a key and a letter. I have never read anything that hurt me and healed me at the same time the way that letter did. It was from my mother. She wrote that she loved me more than anything, and that if something ever happened to her, there were only two possibilities. Either I would need to go to the cabin and find the answers myself, or my father had been responsible for whatever had happened. I had already suspected that he might be capable of hurting her. He had become aggressive over the years, unpredictable, quick to lash out. Anger was the only way he knew how to respond to anything, and it often spilled onto the people around him. Reading that letter confirmed what I had felt all along. My mother hadn't simply disappeared. Something had happened to her, and deep down, I understood that she was probably already gone. The key in my hand felt heavy with meaning, and I knew immediately what it was for. That same day, actually, that same night, I left the house. It wasn't the smartest decision. The forest at night is not a place you wander into lightly, especially in the Appalachian region, where there are things people don't fully understand and never really talk about openly. But I wasn't thinking about any of that. I was driven by something stronger than caution, and I made it there without incident. Once inside, I stayed in that cabin for 2 days. I barely ate, surviving on what little I had brought with me. Before leaving, I asked my neighbor to keep an eye on my father, to make sure he had water and the meals I had already prepared for him, all the while feeling this pull, this urge to stay at that cabin. I went through everything, every paper, every object, every trace of my mother's presence. The cabin wasn't just a place to live. It was something else entirely. It was part office, part laboratory. And whatever my mother had been working on, it was far more serious than anything I could have imagined. I always knew my mother was deeply drawn to science. She had a natural curiosity for biology, geology, for the natural world as a whole, even though she was never given a real opportunity to pursue an academic path, let alone study much beyond elementary school. Everything she had built in that cabin, every book, every note, every sample, came from her own effort, her own discipline, her own quiet determination to learn without anyone's help. What I found there changed the way I saw her completely. She had mapped out a network of caves, an entire underground system. Hand-drawn with incredible precision, each tunnel carefully traced, each chamber marked as if she had spent years studying it. The level of detail was astonishing, and it didn't look like guesswork. It looked like documentation. Alongside those maps, she had collected minerals, samples she had clearly taken from inside those caves. And then there were the drawings. Creatures. I still struggle to describe them properly. She had sketched them in detail and written notes beside each one, since she had no way of photographing them. According to her descriptions, they were pale to the point of being almost white, with little to no functional vision. She believed they relied on sound and movement, reacting to vibrations more than anything visual. The noises they made resembled some form of echolocation, like they were communicating or navigating through sound rather than sight. What unsettled me most wasn't just how they looked, but how she described their behavior. She didn't present them as mindless or purely predatory. She wrote about them as if they had structure, awareness, even a kind of restraint. According to her notes, they weren't inherently aggressive beyond basic survival. She believed that if their environment was respected, if humans kept their distance and didn't disturb their habitat, there could be coexistence. She even mentioned leaving small offerings near certain cave entrances and claimed that doing so seemed to reduce signs of disturbance. At the time, I didn't know what to think. Part of me believed she had lost her grip on reality. Another part wondered if she had stumbled onto something far beyond anything I could comprehend. And then there was the simplest explanation. That it was all imagination, an elaborate narrative she had built for herself in isolation. I didn't have the answers, and if I'm being honest, I wasn't eager to go looking for them. For months, I did nothing. The images she had drawn stayed with me. The way she described their size, their strength, the fact that they were taller than us, stronger than us, adapted to an environment we barely understood. It was enough to keep me away. I had responsibilities. I was in my early 20s, trying to build a life, taking care of my father who was already bedridden by then. Whether he deserved it or not didn't matter to me at the time. He was still my father, and I felt obligated to stay. So I kept visiting the cabin, but only to feel closer to her. I never went into the caves. That changed years later. Around my early 30s, something shifted. Maybe it was time, maybe it was frustration, or maybe it was the need to finally confront whatever truth had been left behind. I started going into the caves, slowly at first, never too far, always careful. But I found nothing, no signs of anything unusual, nothing that matched what she had described. And little by little, I convinced myself that it had all been in her head. Until the day I found her. I believe it was her body. Even now, saying that feels unreal. It was one of the most painful moments of my life, but at the same time, it gave me something I had been searching for since I was 14. Certainty. She hadn't abandoned me. She hadn't walked away. She had died out there, around the time she disappeared. And my father had spent years turning her into something she wasn't, while everyone else chose to believe him. What followed happened quickly. The authorities were called, and an investigation began. At first, everything was handled with care. They explained things to me, kept me informed, treated me like I had a right to know. And then, 5 days later, everything changed. The FBI got involved. They took control of everything. The cabin was sealed off, declared part of an ongoing investigation. I was shut out completely. I no longer have access to it, to anything inside, to anything that belonged to my mother, which by every right should now belong to me. I've filed paperwork, hired a lawyer, spent money I don't have, not because I want the property back, but because I want answers. I want to be part of the investigation. I want to understand what happened to her. She's been erased. No one tells me anything. No updates, no explanations, nothing. And then I go home, and my father is still there, still bedridden, still shouting the same things over and over again. That she left us, that she didn't care, that she was worthless. No matter how many times I tell him the truth, that she died, that she was more than he ever allowed her to be, he just keeps repeating it like none of this ever happened. My life has become something I don't recognize anymore. All I want is to reclaim what was hers, to understand what she found, to know the truth. But they won't let me anywhere near it. And the more time passes, the more I start to believe that what she described wasn't fiction. That something does exist in those caves, something real, something that they don't want anyone else to find. Because if she was right, if those creatures were capable of coexistence, if they only reacted when disturbed, then why all the secrecy? Why shut me out completely? And the worst part is the thought that this might never end. That I'll spend the rest of my life chasing something I'm not allowed to reach. And that one day I'll die without ever knowing what truly happened to her.